You believe you can grace this stage. His voice, a whip crack in the hallowed hall, cut through the silence. I believe I can make it sing, came the quiet yet unwavering reply. In the glittering cutthroat world of classical music, where fortunes are made and reputations shattered in a single note, Maestro Alaric Thorne reigns supreme, a legend whose genius is matched only by his formidable arrogance. But what a mysterious, unheralded pianist steps onto the grand stage of the New York Philharmonic auditions, challenging not just his musical judgment, but the very foundations of privilege he embodies. The stage is set for a confrontation far grander than any symphony. This is the story of Ilara Vance, an artist forged in hardship, whose haunting melodies will shatter the silence of injustice, forcing a powerful man to confront his past, and a world to reckon with the true cost of artistic freedom. Her music isn't just a performance. It's a defiant roar against the establishment, a raw, emotional testament to the power of the human spirit, to triumph against all odds. Now, before we dive deeper, please drop a comment below to let us know where you're watching from. Thank you so much. And now, let's get back to the story. Are you quite certain you possess the formidable talent required to stand on this sacred stage? Maestro Alaric Thorne's voice, a low rumble, filled the hushed auditorium, heavy with the weight of decades of undisputed authority. It was a question designed not to elicit an answer, but to diminish, to crush. I believe I have a voice that deserves to be heard, Maestro, Ilara Vance responded, her own voice, though soft, carrying an unexpected resonance that cut through the cavernous space. The afternoon light, filtered through the grand arched windows of the David Geffen Hall, cast long, dramatic shadows across the empty seats, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air, tiny, insignificant specks in a temple built for giants. Maestro Thorne, a man whose very name evoked reverence and fear in equal measure, stood at the edge of the stage, his silver hair immaculate, his posture as unyielding as the granite beneath their feet. His bespoke suit, tailored to perfection, seemed to emphasize his imposing frame, his sharp, intelligent eyes missing nothing. He was a force of nature, a living legend of the classical world, and his disdain was a palpable thing, a chill that seemed to seep into the very bones of anyone who dared to cross him. Ilara Vance, by contrast, was an island of quiet fortitude amidst the opulence. She wore a simple, charcoal gray dress, its fabric worn but meticulously clean, a stark contrast to the glittering chandeliers and the burnished gleam of the grand Steinway at the center of the stage. Her hands, though slender, showed the faint tracery of calluses, the indelible marks of countless hours spent bent over keys. Her face, framed by dark, unadorned hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, was pale. Yet her eyes, a deep, enigmatic hazel, held a glimmer of something unbreakable, a spirit that refused to be bowed. She was an outsider, a name unknown to the elite circles of New York's classical music scene, and her presence here, at the highly anticipated auditions for the coveted principal pianist position with the New York Philharmonic, was, to many, an anomaly. To Maestro Thorne, it was an insult. He had barely glanced at her curriculum vitae, a single sheet of paper devoid of the usual prestigious conservatories, the glowing recommendations from renowned professors, or the awards from international competitions that typically adorn such submissions. Instead, it listed a smattering of local church performances, volunteer work at community centers, and a self-funded recital series in forgotten halls. It spoke of passion, yes, but not of pedigree, and in Thorne's world, pedigree was paramount. "A voice, Miss Vance?" Thorne sneered, a flicker of amusement, dark and cold, in his eyes. He turned to the other 4 members of the audition panel, renowned musicians and critics, who sat like statues, their faces carefully neutral, though a hint of shared skepticism rippled through their ranks. We are not seeking a singer, but a soloist, a virtuoso, someone who can command the very soul of the orchestra, not merely whisper into its ear. Ilara's gaze did not waver. "Music is a language, maestro," she replied, her voice gaining a quiet strength. "And a language is meant to convey a message, a feeling. Sometimes, a whisper can carry more truth than a shout." A collective intake of breath could be heard from the panel, a barely perceptible tremor in the air. No one, absolutely no one, dared to speak to Maestro Thorne with such directness, such unyielding conviction. Thorne's expression hardened, his jaw clenching. He strode towards the piano, his steps deliberate, each one echoing with his unchallenged authority. He reached out, his long artistic fingers hovering over the sheet music stand. "Very well, Miss Vance," he intoned, his voice dangerously soft. "Let us see if your whisper holds any substance. You will perform Ravel's Gaspard de la Nuit, specifically, Scarbo." The title hung in the air, a gauntlet thrown. Scarbo was a notorious beast of a piece, a fiendishly difficult composition, known for its dazzling technical demands, its swirling arpeggios, its complex polyrhythms, and its requirement for an almost demonic intensity. It was a piece designed to separate the truly brilliant from the merely talented, to expose the slightest flaw, the smallest weakness. To assign it to an unknown pianist without prior notice was a deliberate act of sabotage, a test of fire meant to consume the unprepared. A faint tremor ran through Ilara's hands, a fleeting moment of self-doubt. She knew this piece, of course, had studied it, dreamed of mastering it, but never imagined performing it under such unforgiving scrutiny, without the hours of focused mental preparation usually afforded for such an undertaking. Memories flashed through her mind: the cramped apartment, the worn upright piano, the endless nights practicing by the light of a single lamp, each note a prayer, each chord a promise to a world that had given her little. The sacrifices, the dismissals, the patronizing smiles of those who deemed her unsuitable for the rarefied world of classical music because of her background, her lack of connections, her unpolished edges. This wasn't just an audition. It was a battle, a chance to reclaim her dignity, to assert the voice of all those unheard. She walked to the piano, her footsteps light but firm. The polished wood felt cool beneath her fingertips as she settled onto the bench, adjusting the height with a precise, almost ritualistic movement. She closed her eyes for a fleeting second, drawing a deep breath, letting the silence of the hall envelop her, calm her. When she opened them, her gaze met Thorne's, an unspoken challenge passing between them. Then, her hands, those callous, determined hands, found their place on the keys. For a moment, she seemed to be searching, feeling the ivory beneath her touch, a communion with the instrument. The air was thick with anticipation, the panel members leaning forward imperceptibly. Thorne watched her, a cynical smirk playing on his lips, waiting for the inevitable stumble, the collapse. Her fingers descended. The first notes of Scarbo were a whisper, an ethereal, almost spectral shimmering, a delicate, disquieting dance that immediately defied Thorne's expectation of a forceful, showy beginning. It was not a grand entrance, but an invitation into a dark, fantastical world. Then the music began to twist and turn, the arpeggios rising like a whirlwind, each note articulated with a clarity that was both startling and profound. The sheer speed, the precision, the effortless transition between the terrifyingly complex rhythms, It was all there, but imbued with something more, something raw and deeply human. Her body swayed slightly with the music, her eyes half closed, lost in the tempest she was conjuring. The piano, that grand, imposing instrument, was no longer separate from her. It was an extension of her very soul, singing with a voice that was both ancient and utterly new. The cynicism on Thorne's face began to falter, replaced by a subtle shift, a flicker of something akin to surprise, then grudging respect. The other judges exchanged wide-eyed glances. This was not merely talent. This was something else entirely. This was passion incarnate, defiance set to music. The notes cascaded and surged, building to a furious, exhilarating climax, a torrent of sound that filled the hall, each chord a hammer blow, each melody a cry. Ilara's performance was not just playing the notes, it was living them, breathing them, translating the very essence of struggle and triumph into a breathtaking, almost overwhelming tapestry of sound. It was the sound of a spirit unbound, a voice refusing to be silenced. The maestro's breath hitched, an almost imperceptible movement, as Ilara plunged into a passage of breathtaking complexity, her fingers a blur, yet every note ringing with crystal clarity. The music coursed through the very air, vibrating in the chests of the panel, stirring something ancient and powerful within them. Thorne, a man who believed he had heard every interpretation, every virtuoso, every nuance the piano could offer, found himself utterly captivated, frozen in a moment of disbelieving awe. The smirk had vanished entirely, replaced by a profound, unsettling silence on his face, as the sheer, undeniable power of her art washed over him. He was losing control of the narrative, and the terrifying realization of it began to settle deep within his bones. The final, breathtaking chord of Scarbo hung in the air, a shimmering, dissonant ghost that lingered long after Ilara Vance's hands had lifted from the keys. The silence that followed was not merely the absence of sound. It was a profound, almost sacred quiet, weighted with the raw emotion that Ilara had poured into every note. The very air in David Geffen Hall seemed to hum, charged with the lingering echoes of her performance. Maestro Alaric Thorne, a man whose judgment was rarely swayed, stood motionless, his posture as rigid as a statue. The cynical smirk that had been a permanent fixture on his lips throughout the initial moments of her audition had utterly vanished, replaced by an expression of profound, unsettling contemplation. His eyes, usually sharp and dissecting, were wide, a flicker of something dangerously close to awe visible in their depths. He had expected technical proficiency, perhaps even a hint of talent. But what Ilara had delivered was nothing short of transcendent. It was an audacious, deeply personal interpretation, bursting with a vitality and raw honesty that defied all expectations, all preconceived notions of what Scarbo should be. The other four members of the audition panel, seasoned professionals who had witnessed countless prodigies and pretenders, were similarly stunned. Their faces, previously etched with disinterest or polite skepticism, now bore expressions ranging from open astonishment to a sort of bewildered reverence. One older woman, a renowned music critic, slowly, almost unconsciously, dabbed at the corner of her eye with a pristine white handkerchief. It was a silent testament to the deeply moving power of Ilara's music. Ilara herself remained at the piano, her shoulders slightly slumped, a delicate sheen of perspiration on her brow. The immense physical and emotional exertion of the piece had left her drained, but a quiet, almost defiant triumph shone in her hazel eyes. She had faced the beast, and she had not only tamed it, but had made it sing her own haunting, magnificent song. She felt the weight of Thorn's gaze, a palpable force, and understood that the battle was far from over. This man, so deeply entrenched in his world of privilege and unwavering authority, would not easily concede defeat, especially not to an outsider like her. Seconds stretched into an eternity, the silence growing heavier, more potent than any applause could have been. Finally, Thorn moved. He walked slowly, deliberately towards the piano, his eyes fixed on Alara. Each step seemed to echo, a deliberate assertion of his presence. He stopped just feet from her, towering over her slight frame, his shadow falling across the keyboard. "An interesting interpretation, Miss Vance," he began, his voice surprisingly devoid of its usual cutting edge, though a dangerous undertone remained. He paused, as if weighing his words with meticulous care. "Undeniably powerful. Technically, astonishing for someone of your background." The last word, background, was uttered with a subtle inflection, a barely perceptible sneer that aimed to undercut the preceding compliments, to remind her of her place. Ilara met his gaze without flinching. "I play the music as I feel it, maestro," she replied, her voice steady, though her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "My background is simply the canvas upon which my experiences are painted." Thorn's jaw tightened. Her refusal to be intimidated, her quiet defiance, clearly rankled him. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper, though it carried clearly in the silent hall. "Emotion, Miss Vance, is a double-edged sword. It can elevate, yes, but it can also obscure. The great masters, they demand precision, intellectual rigor, a refined understanding that transcends mere sentiment. What you presented, while undeniably potent, lacked a certain polish. The raw energy, while compelling, can sometimes be perceived as uncultured." It was a deliberate barb, aimed not at her technical skill, which he could not fault, but at her very essence, her origin. It implied that her truth, her raw, unfiltered artistic expression, was somehow inferior, less worthy than the polished, sterile perfection he associated with true mastery. It was the age-old gatekeeping of the elite, designed to keep out anyone who dared to challenge their definitions of excellence. A flash of anger, hot and fierce, sparked in Alara's eyes, quickly veiled. She thought of the countless hours she had dedicated, not in opulent conservatories, but in cramped, unheated rooms, coaxing melodies from an old, donated piano. She thought of the children she taught in underserved communities, their eyes alight with the joy of music, a joy that knew nothing of polish or culture as defined by men like Thorn. Her music was born of struggle, of hope, of the profound belief in the power of art to uplift and heal, not to conform to an outdated, exclusionary ideal. "Is true art, maestro," she asked, her voice low, "not found in the raw, unadulterated expression of the human spirit? Or must it always be cloaked in the silken robes of convention to be deemed worthy?" Thorn recoiled slightly, as if struck. No one had ever dared to challenge his philosophical stance on music. Not openly, not so directly. His eyes narrowed, a cold, calculated fury simmering beneath his composed exterior. He glanced at the panel, whose members now looked distinctly uncomfortable, sensing the dangerous shift in the atmosphere. "Your questions are impertinent, Miss Vance," Thorn clipped, regaining a measure of his chilling composure. "And your artistry, while impressive, remains untested in the true crucible of the Philharmonic. This orchestra requires not merely a performer, but a collaborator, someone who can understand the subtle nuances, the delicate tapestry of sound we weave, and not merely impose their singular vision upon it. He paused, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "We have one more piece for you, Miss Vance. One that will truly determine if your unique voice can blend, can serve the greater whole, or if it is merely a solitary cry in the wilderness." He turned to a music stand near the grand piano and, with a flourish, placed a bound score upon it. It was a dense, intimidating volume, its pages filled with intricate notation. Ilara's eyes scanned the title, and her breath caught in her throat. It was Brahms's Piano Concerto No. 2, the final movement, a gargantuan work, famed for its lyrical beauty, its profound emotional depth, and its fiendishly complex interplay between soloist and orchestra. But the impossible part was not just the piece itself. "The full orchestra will be joining you in 10 minutes, Miss Vance," Thorne announced, his voice now imbued with an almost cruel satisfaction. "We will perform this movement cold. No rehearsal, no prior preparation with the ensemble. Let us see if your spirit, however defiant, can truly synchronize with the heart of this institution, or if it will simply shatter under the pressure." The air crackled with the impossible demand. To perform a concerto movement of such complexity with a world-class orchestra, without a single rehearsal, was an unheard-of challenge. A deliberate act of setting her up for a spectacular public failure. It was a test designed to break her, to prove that her raw talent, however potent, could not withstand the unyielding demands of their gilded world. Ilara looked at the score, then at Thorne, her defiance now tinged with a stark realization of the precipice she stood upon. She was being offered a chance at greatness, yes, but at the cost of utter humiliation if she faltered. And the maestro, she knew, expected her to falter. Her heart sank, then hardened. She was being asked not just to play, but to fight, to make a statement that would reverberate far beyond the notes on the page. The weight of Brahms's Piano Concerto No. 2, the final movement, pressed down on Ilara Vance like a physical force. 10 minutes. 10 agonizing minutes to mentally prepare for an impromptu collaboration with one of the world's most esteemed orchestras, under the scrutinizing glare of Maestro Alaric Thorne. It was an impossible demand, a deliberate crucible designed to expose her weaknesses, to prove her an interloper. Yet, as the realization solidified, so too did a defiant resolve deep within her. She had not come this far, fought so fiercely, only to be broken by a challenge, no matter how daunting. The hall began to stir. From the stage wings, musicians of the New York Philharmonic started to emerge, a ripple of quiet chatter and the rustle of sheet music filling the air. Cellists cradled their instruments, violinists rosined their bows, and woodwind players meticulously assembled their flutes and clarinets. They took their places with practiced grace, their faces a mixture of professional focus and undisguised curiosity. News of the audacious challenge had clearly spread, and every musician's gaze, from the first-chair violin to the percussionists in the back, was fixed on the lone figure at the Steinway. Many had heard whispers of Thorne's brutal temperament, but this public, unrehearsed performance of a Brahms concerto was a new level of artistic sadism. Maestro Thorne, a dark silhouette against the stage lights, watched Ilara, a faint, almost imperceptible curl of his lip betraying his anticipation of her failure. He walked with measured steps to the conductor's podium, his back to the audience, but his presence was a palpable weight. He raised his hands, and the orchestra, with years of disciplined intuition, fell into an immediate, hushed readiness. The silence, once again, descended. But this time it was pregnant with the collective anticipation of hundreds, a living, breathing entity. Elara closed her eyes one last time, picturing the complex score, feeling the ebb and flow of its majestic themes. She imagined the dialogue between piano and orchestra, the intricate dance of harmony and counterpoint. She wasn't just recalling notes, she was recalling emotions, memories, the very essence of struggle and shared humanity that Brahms poured into his music. This wasn't about showing off. It was about truly listening, truly responding. It was about finding a way to connect, not just with the music, but with the dozens of musicians who now waited for her lead, many of whom clearly doubted her capability. She opened her eyes, meeting Thorne's intense gaze across the expanse of the stage. A subtle, almost imperceptible nod passed between them, a silent signal for the impossible journey to begin. Thorne brought his baton down, a precise, sharp arc. The orchestra swelled, a rich, resonant tide of sound filling the hall with the opening phrases of the Brahms. The horns, deep and soulful, introduced the main theme, followed by the sweeping strings, a majestic, melancholic narrative unfolding. Elara listened, not merely passively but actively, allowing the music to wash over her, to guide her. She breathed with the orchestra, felt its collective pulse, absorbing its grandeur. Then, it was her turn. Her fingers, still trembling faintly from the adrenaline of Scarbo, found their touch on the keys, tentative at first, then gaining a powerful, soaring confidence. She entered the musical conversation not as a soloist asserting dominance, but as a voice joining a chorus, responding to the orchestra's warmth with a breathtaking lyricism that seemed to pluck at the heartstrings of everyone listening. The challenge of an unrehearsed performance was not just technical. It was a psychological tightrope walk. Every musician was hyper-aware, listening intently, adjusting, improvising, trying to find common ground in the uncharted territory. Thorne, ever the master, conducted with an almost ferocious precision, his eyes darting between Elara and the various sections, his baton shaping the air, guiding the flow. He was looking for any hesitation, any misstep, any moment where her singular vision would clash with the ensemble. But Elara, surprisingly, was not clashing. She was weaving. Her playing was bold, yet sensitive, her phrasing mirroring the orchestra's, her dynamics a testament to her innate musicality. She wasn't just following, she was leading, drawing out new colors, subtle nuances from the orchestral fabric that surprised even the seasoned musicians. There were moments of breathtaking synchronicity, spontaneous dialogues between piano and cello, piano and clarinet, that felt as though they had been rehearsed for weeks, not minutes. Midway through the movement, a complex passage arose, a rapid exchange between the piano and the brass section, notoriously difficult to align even with meticulous rehearsal. Thorne's eyes fixed on Elara, a flicker of triumphant anticipation in his gaze. This, he thought, would be her undoing. This was where the uncultured, raw energy would betray her, where her lack of formal training and ensemble work would become painfully apparent. But Elara, somehow, seemed to anticipate the brass's entry, her hands executing a blinding flurry of notes, then easing back just enough, creating a perfect pocket for the horns to soar. It was a moment of pure, instinctive genius, a demonstration of an almost telepathic understanding of the music. A few of the brass players exchanged surprised, impressed glances. Thorne's control, usually absolute, began to fray at the edges. He found himself not merely conducting but reacting to Elara, responding to the unexpected depth and artistry she brought to the piece. He was being challenged, not by defiance, but by sheer, undeniable musical truth. Her playing was not just technically brilliant, it was emotionally profound, imbuing every note with a storytelling power that transcended the strictures of classical interpretation. She played with a vulnerability that laid bare the heart of the music, yet with a strength that belied her gentle demeanor. It was as if Brahms himself were channeling his spirit through her, speaking directly to the souls of all present. The audience of judges, initially composed and detached, found themselves drawn into the performance, their posture relaxing, their expression softening. The music filled the hall, no longer a test, but a shared experience, a collective journey into beauty. Hilara, lost in the music, poured every ounce of her being into the performance, not playing for the judges or for Thorne, but for the very soul of the piece, for the silent, unseen audience of those who yearned for a voice. As the final, glorious crescendo built, the orchestra soared with her, not against her. The sound was immense, overwhelming, a tapestry woven from individual voices, but led by the singular, undeniable brilliance of Hilara's piano. She brought the movement to its majestic, resounding conclusion, her hands descending with a final, echoing flourish. The last note faded, and once again, silence descended. But this silence was different. It was not fraught with tension, but filled with a shared breath, a collective exhalation of wonder. The musicians of the orchestra, usually quick to pack up, remained in their seats, several of them looking at Hilara with undisguised respect, even admiration. Maestro Thorne stood at the podium, his baton still raised, frozen in the afterglow of the music. His face, usually a mask of imperious control, was now unreadable. A complex mixture of astonishment, bewilderment, and something else entirely. A dawning, uncomfortable recognition. He looked at Hilara, truly saw her, perhaps for the first time. The unknown pianist had not just survived his impossible challenge. She had triumphed, not by overpowering, but by inspiring. She had orchestrated not just notes, but a connection that transcended the barriers of ego and expectation. He lowered his baton slowly, deliberately. The sound was a soft click against the podium, yet it resonated like a clap of thunder in the sudden, expectant silence. He turned, his gaze sweeping across the faces of the panel, then back to Hilara. The air in the hall thickened, charged with the anticipation of his verdict. What could he possibly say? How could he deny such a performance? His next words would not just decide Hilara's fate, but perhaps redefine his own legacy. The low click of Maestro Thorne's baton against the podium was the only sound in the vast hall, a stark punctuation mark to the resounding silence that followed Hilara Vance's breathtaking performance. Every eye, every ear was riveted on him, waiting for his verdict. His reputation, his very identity as the arbiter of musical taste and talent, hung in the balance, challenged by an unknown woman who had dared to play with her soul laid bare. He turned, his gaze sweeping across the panel members, whose expressions ranged from stunned awe to a quiet, knowing satisfaction. They had witnessed something extraordinary, a moment of pure, unadulterated artistry that defied all the rules, all the expectations. Thorne's eyes lingered on Hilara for a long moment, a complex storm brewing within their depths. He saw not just a pianist, but a force, a relentless spirit that refused to be confined by the gilded cages of classical convention. Then, to the collective astonishment of everyone present, Alaric Thorne, the formidable, unyielding maestro, did something entirely uncharacteristic. He smiled. It was not his usual cynical smirk, nor a condescending grimace. It was a genuine, albeit faint and weary, smile, a reluctant acknowledgement of an undeniable truth. "Miss Vance," he began, his voice softer than anyone had ever heard it, almost a murmur, yet imbued with an undeniable authority that commanded absolute attention. "You have played with an honesty that is both refreshing and, dare I say, profoundly unsettling." He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if delving into a memory, a ghost of a past melody. "Your technique is formidable, your musicality undeniable. To play Brahms, cold, with this orchestra, and not merely survive but thrive, it is a feat that few, if any, could accomplish." A ripple went through the panel. It was an unprecedented admission of excellence from Thorne, whose praise was as rare and precious as ancient gold. "However," he continued, the softness hardening slightly, "the New York Philharmonic is more than just a stage for individual brilliance. It is a legacy, a tradition. It demands not just exceptional talent, but a certain understanding of its place in the world, its patrons, its history, its very soul." He paused, his gaze growing distant, almost pained. "And that, Miss Vance, is a depth of understanding that I suspect you may yet lack." Ilara's heart, which had soared with his initial words, now plummeted. It was a classic Thorne maneuver, to praise with one hand only to diminish with the other, to find a new, insidious way to invalidate her triumph. It wasn't about the music anymore, it was about something far more insidious, something outside the realm of notes and melodies. "Maestro," Ilara began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. "Music speaks to all souls, regardless of their understanding of its patrons or history. It is a universal language meant to bridge divides, not deepen them." Thorne's eyes, suddenly sharp and cold again, fixed on her. "A poetic sentiment, Miss Vance, but this institution, this city, demands more than sentiment. It demands connections. It demands a familiarity with the unspoken rules, the subtle currents that govern this world." He took a deep breath, and his next words were a hammer blow. "While your performance was undeniably inspired, I cannot, in good conscience, recommend you for the principal pianist position at this time." A gasp, faint but audible, escaped one of the panel members. The other judges looked down, unable to meet Ilara's gaze. It was a rejection, cloaked in condescending praise, a dismissal, delivered with a velvet glove. The principal pianist position, a dream for any classical musician, was snatched away, not because of her talent, but because she simply wasn't of their world. Ilara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. All the struggle, all the sacrifices, all the moments of doubt and triumph, culminating in this: a dismissal based on unspoken, arbitrary rules. It was the epitome of the systemic injustice she had fought against her entire life. It wasn't just about her. It was about every artist, every voice, every dream that had been crushed by the impenetrable walls of privilege and prejudice. She pushed herself up from the piano bench, her gaze unwavering as she faced Thorne. "Maestro," she said, her voice clear, imbued with a newfound strength. "You speak of connections, of unspoken rules, but what of the connection between musician and audience? What of the unspoken truth in a melody? A truth that transcends wealth and status?" Thorne's face, usually impassive, showed a flicker of something raw, something almost pained. "You speak with conviction, Miss Vance. But conviction alone does not build a career in the upper echelons of this industry." He paused, his eyes scanning the empty hall, as if haunted by ghosts. "Perhaps, in time, you will learn the necessary humility." "Or, perhaps," Elara countered, her voice ringing with a quiet defiance that surprised even herself, "the industry will learn to recognize true artistry, regardless of where it originates. Perhaps it will learn to distinguish between talent born of genuine passion and talent merely polished by privilege." Thorne's eyes blazed. "You presume much, young woman." "I presume to challenge a system that values pedigree over passion and connections over creativity," Elara shocked back, her voice rising now, echoing in the vast, silent hall. "I presume to believe that music, true music, should be accessible to all, not just a select few who can afford the right schools, the right teachers, the right connections." The atmosphere in the hall was electric, charged with the undeniable tension of two immovable forces colliding. The panel members sat frozen, aghast at Elara's audacity. Never had anyone spoken to Maestro Thorne with such blunt, unwavering truth. Thorne stared at her, his face a mask of complex emotions. Anger, yes, but also a hint of something else. Something that bordered on a flicker of recognition, a memory stirring from the depths of his own carefully constructed facade. He saw in her not just defiance, but a reflection of a younger self, perhaps, before the world of classical music had hardened him, molded him into the formidable, often cruel figure he had become. He took a slow, deliberate breath, and when he spoke, his voice was laced with an unexpected venom. "You may believe your cause is noble, Miss Vance, but you are naive. This world is far more complex than your simplistic ideals allow. And I assure you, those who challenge its foundations often find themselves crushed beneath its weight." He paused, his gaze piercing. "Consider this a valuable, albeit painful, lesson." As Thorne turned to dismiss the panel, a sudden, almost desperate thought flashed through Elara's mind. She couldn't leave this conversation here, not without making one final, undeniable statement. It wasn't about the job anymore. It was about proving her point, about making her voice, and the voices of all those unheard, truly resonate. "Maestro," she called out, her voice echoing, stopping him mid-turn. "If the New York Philharmonic is truly about artistry and not merely about pedigree, then I propose a different kind of challenge." Thorne slowly turned back, his expression a mixture of irritation and grudging curiosity. "Indeed? And what grand proposal might that be, Miss Vance, from one who has just been deemed unsuitable?" Elara took a deep breath, her gaze sweeping across the orchestra, the empty seats, the judging panel, before settling once more on Thorne. "Let the public decide, Maestro. Let the people, not your panel, judge what true music is. I challenge you to a public performance, an open competition. You with your chosen prodigy, and I with my own music. Let the city hear both, and let them be the arbiters of taste, the true judges of artistry. If you believe your system is so superior, then prove it, without the veil of closed-door auditions and elitist panels." The silence that followed Elara's audacious challenge was deafening. The sheer temerity of her proposal hung in the air, a bold, unprecedented gauntlet thrown at the feet of the most powerful man in classical music. Thorne's face, usually so composed, was a mask of shock, then disbelief, then a slow, dangerous fury. This unknown woman, this outsider, was not merely asking for a job. She was demanding a revolution. Elara Vance's challenge hung in the cavernous hall like a palpable entity, vibrating with audacious defiance. "Let the public decide," she had declared, her voice ringing with conviction, proposing an open competition that would tear down the gilded curtain of elite classical music and expose it to the unvarnished judgment of the people. Maestro Alaric Thorne, a man whose word was law in this world, stood utterly frozen, his face a complex tableau of shock, indignation, and a simmering, dangerous fury. An open challenge? A public competition? It was an unprecedented assault on his authority, an unthinkable breach of decorum in his meticulously controlled realm. The panel members, aghast, exchanged horrified glances. Such a spectacle would not only disrupt the hallowed traditions of the New York Philharmonic, but would also expose its inner workings, its very selection process, to the unfiltered scrutiny of the masses. It was anathema to everything they stood for. "You dare to propose such a circus, Miss Vance?" Thorne finally hissed, his voice low and trembling with suppressed rage. His eyes blazed, twin points of glacial fury. "You believe this institution, this grand temple of art, should be reduced to a common spectacle? A populist sideshow?" "I believe," Elara countered, her voice now steady, imbued with the strength of her conviction, "that true art is meant to uplift and inspire all people, Maestro, not just those who can afford a box seat. And if its validity must be judged by the very people it claims to serve, then perhaps the circus is not the art itself, but the closed-door rituals that shroud it in exclusivity." Thorne took a step towards her, his imposing figure radiating menace. "Your arrogance is as boundless as your naivete, young woman. You speak of the people, yet you have no comprehension of the intricate ballet of funding, patronage, and critical acclaim that sustains an institution of this magnitude. To expose it to such vulgarity would be to dismantle it entirely." "Or perhaps," Elara retorted, meeting his fiery gaze without flinching, "it would be to revitalize it, to remind it of its true purpose. Is the music truly grand if it only resonates within the walls of an echo chamber, cut off from the very pulse of the city it claims to represent?" Her words, sharp and undeniable, struck a nerve. Thorne paused, his anger momentarily displaced by a flicker of something unsettling. A dawning realization that her challenge, however preposterous, carried a kernel of truth that he, in his insulated world, had long ignored. The attendance for classical concerts had been dwindling, the demographics aging. There was a desperate need for new blood, new audiences, new relevance. He swept his gaze over the panel, whose silent, anxious faces reflected their own discomfort. He knew that to dismiss her outright, to refuse the challenge, would make him appear weak, afraid. It would only fuel Elara's narrative, painting him as the elitist gatekeeper, desperate to protect his ivory tower. And a public perception of weakness was a chink in the armor he could not afford. A slow, calculating light entered Thorne's eyes. "Very well, Miss Vance," he said, his voice now dangerously calm. "You wish for a public spectacle. You shall have it. But understand this. Such a challenge would not be a mere audition. It would be a full-scale concert, a production. It would require considerable resources, meticulous planning, and the involvement of the city's highest echelons." He paused, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "And who, pray tell, would fund this grand populist endeavor of yours? Who would lend their name, their resources to such an unproven venture?" It was a trap, a logistical nightmare designed to make her retreat, to highlight her lack of connections. Ilara felt a momentary tremor of fear. He was right. She had no powerful patrons, no wealthy donors, no intricate network of influence. Her connections were to the streets, to the community centers, to the small forgotten halls where true passion often found its refuge. "I will find them, Maestro," Ilara declared, her voice firm despite the rising tide of doubt. "If the people truly wish for a voice to be heard, they will find a way to make it so." Thorne scoffed. "A commendable, if utterly fanciful, belief. But allow me to provide you with a reality check. I shall grant you precisely 2 weeks, Miss Vance. 2 weeks to secure a venue suitable for such a performance, to gather the necessary funding, and to organize every single logistical detail. If you fail to meet even one of these requirements, the challenge is null and void, and you will forever relinquish any claim to a position within the New York Philharmonic, or indeed any major orchestra in this city. Do you understand the monumental task before you?" His words were a poisoned chalice, an impossible demand disguised as an opportunity. He expected her to fail, spectacularly, publicly, thus solidifying his position and discrediting her forever. But Ilara met his gaze, a quiet resolve hardening her features. "I understand, Maestro, and I accept your terms." With a curt nod, Thorne dismissed the panel and, without another word to Ilara, turned and strode off the stage, his rigid back a testament to his indignation. The other judges quickly followed, casting her sympathetic yet pitying glances. The orchestra members, now buzzing with excited whispers, began to pack up, their eyes still occasionally darting towards Ilara, a mixture of wonder and apprehension on their faces. Ilara stood alone on the vast stage, the enormity of her promise, her challenge, suddenly descending upon her. 2 weeks. 2 weeks to organize a major classical music event in one of the world's most competitive cities, with no resources, no connections, and against the formidable opposition of Maestro Alaric Thorne. It was an act of pure, unadulterated madness. As the last musician filed out, a solitary figure remained in the shadows of the wings. It was the older music critic from the panel, the one who had dabbed her eye during Ilara's Brahms performance. She approached Ilara slowly, her expression unreadable. "Miss Vance," the critic began, her voice a soft, cultured murmur. "My name is Evelyn Reed. I have been reviewing classical music for over 40 years, and I have never witnessed such raw, unbridled truth in a performance as I did today. Nor such audacious courage." Ilara looked at her, a flicker of hope amidst the encroaching despair. "Thank you, Miss Reed, but I fear courage alone will not secure a venue or funding." Evelyn Reed's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "Perhaps not, but truth, Miss Vance, has a way of finding its own audience. And I believe in your truth. Maestro Thorne," she continued, her voice dropping, "is a formidable opponent, but he is also a man haunted by ghosts. Ghosts of his own past, of sacrifices made, of ideals perhaps abandoned." She paused, her gaze distant. "He was not always this way, you know. There was a time when he, too, challenged the establishment, when his music was a defiant roar against the very conventions he now upholds." Ilara stared at her, a new layer of complexity added to the enigmatic maestro. "What happened?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Evelyn sighed, a sound heavy with untold stories. "Life, Miss Vance, and the demands of a system that rewards conformity above all else. But that is a story for another time." She reached into her elegant handbag and produced a small, leather-bound notebook and a pen. She scribbled a number on a page, tore it out, and handed it to Alara. "This is my private number. You will need a journalist on your side, Miss Vance, one who understands the true stakes of this battle. Someone who can articulate your vision and expose the injustice of Thorne's rejection to the wider public. And perhaps," she added, her eyes twinkling with a hint of mischief, "someone who might just know a few people willing to take a risk on a revolution." Alara clutched the paper, a fragile lifeline thrown to her in the midst of her seemingly impossible task. The gauntlet had been thrown, and now, against all odds, it had been accepted. But the true battle was just beginning, and Alara knew, with a chilling certainty, that it would require more than just her music. It would require her very soul. She glanced at the stage, then out into the empty auditorium. The quiet stillness felt like the lull before a storm that would either sweep her away or forever change the landscape of classical music. Evelyn Reed's words, "You will need a journalist on your side," echoed in Alara Vance's mind as she clutched the scrap of paper bearing the critic's private number. The weight of Thorne's impossible ultimatum, 2 weeks to secure a venue and funding for a major public concert, pressed down on her, a chilling reminder of the chasm between her raw talent and the formidable machinery of the classical music establishment. But Evelyn's quiet conviction, her whispered hint of Thorne's own haunted past, had ignited a flicker of hope, a fragile flame against the encroaching darkness of despair. The next morning, the city felt different. The usual bustling rhythm of New York, a symphony of horns, hurried footsteps, and distant sirens, seemed to carry a new urgency. Alara sat in a small bustling coffee shop, the critic's number a beacon in her hand. Taking a deep breath, she dialed. Evelyn Reed answered on the second ring, her voice surprisingly warm and direct. "Miss Vance, I trust you've had a moment to consider the magnitude of your undertaking." "And the magnitude of Maestro Thorne's intransigence," Alara replied, a wry smile touching her lips. "I need your help, Miss Reed. I need someone to believe in this vision, to help me make it real." "Belief is one thing, Miss Vance," Evelyn said, a hint of steel in her tone. "Logistics are another. Tell me, what have you done so far?" Alara admitted her lack of progress, her voice tinged with frustration. She had spent the night researching venues, only to find them either astronomically expensive or booked solid for months. Funding was an even more daunting enigma. Evelyn listened patiently. "As I suspected, this city does not make it easy for those without established connections. However, a compelling narrative can sometimes open doors that money cannot. I can write a piece, an exposé, perhaps, on the archaic practices of the Philharmonic, and your audacious challenge. It would certainly generate public interest. But even public interest requires a physical space and tangible support." "I don't just need a venue, Ms. Reed," Alara confided, a new thought solidifying in her mind. "I need a venue that means something, a place that resonates with the very idea of challenging the elite, of bringing music to the people." Evelyn paused. "That's a tall order, Miss Vance. The most prominent halls are, as you've discovered, either controlled by institutions like the Philharmonic or prohibitively expensive." She was silent for a moment, then spoke, her voice laced with a newfound intrigue. "Unless there's one possibility. A venue that once housed a very different kind of performance. A place undergoing renovations, perhaps, but with a history that might perfectly encapsulate your message. Where? Elara pressed, a surge of adrenaline coursing through her. The old Palace Theater on Broadway, Evelyn revealed. It's been closed for years, a grand dame fallen into disrepair. But I've heard rumors of a community-led initiative to restore it, to turn it into a multi-arts cultural hub, accessible to everyone. It's not a classical concert hall, certainly, but its history, its very bones speak of the theatrical, the dramatic, the grand gesture. And it's not yet officially reopened, which might give us an advantage regarding booking. A theater, not a hushed, hallowed concert hall, but a place of vibrant, accessible performance. It resonated deeply with Elara's vision. "How do I reach them?" she asked, her mind already racing with possibilities. Evelyn provided a name and a contact number, then added, "While you pursue that, I will begin writing. I will contact my editor, make some calls. The maestro won't know what hit him. But be warned, Miss Vance. Once this story breaks, you will be thrust into a spotlight unlike anything you've ever known. And Thorne will retaliate. He always does." Elara thanked her, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The Palace Theater. It felt right. The next few days were a blur of frenetic activity. Elara called the contact Evelyn provided, a tenacious, idealistic woman named Lena Rodriguez, the lead organizer for the Palace Theater restoration project. Lena, initially wary, listened intently as Elara poured out her story, her audition, Thorne's rejection, and the audacious public challenge. To Elara's surprise, Lena's skepticism quickly turned into passionate enthusiasm. A classical concert in the palace? A challenge to the Philharmonic's ivory tower, Lena exclaimed, her voice crackling with excitement over the phone. "Miss Vance, this is exactly the kind of energy we need. Our vision for the palace is about democratizing art, breaking down barriers. This is perfect." Lena explained that the theater was still very much a construction site, far from performance-ready. But a large part of the main hall and stage was structurally sound enough for a single event, if they worked around the ongoing renovations. The biggest hurdle was the cost, and the sheer audacity of asking for such a space for free, or at a minimal cost. "We have no budget for rent, Lena," Elara admitted, "and minimal for production. It would have to be a partnership, a statement. If we pull this off, the palace would be globally recognized as the birthplace of this movement, this challenge to the establishment." Lena was quiet for a long moment. "Let me speak to the board." "This is a gamble, Miss Vance, a huge one. But the publicity alone, and the message it sends, it could be exactly what we need to jumpstart our fundraising for the full restoration. I'll call you back tomorrow." The following day, a whirlwind of positive news began to converge. Evelyn Reed's article hit the digital presses, a scathing yet eloquent critique of Thorne's elitism and a stirring portrayal of Elara's courageous stand. Titled, "Maestro's Decree, Is Classical Music Only for the Privileged Few?" It immediately went viral, igniting a passionate debate across social media and traditional news outlets. The comment sections erupted with support for Elara, mixed with outrage at Thorne's perceived arrogance. Then Lena called. "Elara," she said, her voice brimming with excitement. "The board has approved it. The palace is yours for one night, free of charge. But," she cautioned, "it will be raw. Minimal staging, exposed brick, scaffolding still visible in parts. and we'll need volunteers, a lot of them, to make it performance-ready in time." Ilara's heart soared. A venue, a space that perfectly embodied her message. The raw, unfinished nature of it felt profoundly right, a symbol of art in its most authentic, unadorned form. But then, the other shoe dropped. The notification pinged on her phone. It was an email from the New York Philharmonic, a terse, legalistic message. It informed her that, in light of recent developments and unprofessional conduct, Maestro Alaric Thorne had regretfully decided to withdraw the offer of a public challenge. The competition, it stated, was now officially canceled. Ilara stared at the screen, her mind reeling. Thorne was backing out. He was afraid. But it wasn't over, not by a long shot. Evelyn's article had already ignited a wildfire. The public was on her side. The Palace Theater was secured. He couldn't silence her now. In fact, his withdrawal only strengthened her resolve, turning her flicker of hope into a blazing inferno. But as she reread the email, another, more chilling thought occurred to her. Thorne had called off his challenge, but she had made her own, and she had accepted his terms. What if his withdrawal wasn't just fear, but a calculated tactical retreat? What if he had another, far more insidious plan to undermine her and ensure her public humiliation? The game, she realized, was far from over. It had only just begun. And the maestro, she knew, was not a man to be underestimated, especially when his pride and his position were threatened. The New York Philharmonic's terse email, declaring the public challenge regretfully withdrawn, hit Ilara Vance like a cold, calculated slap. It confirmed her suspicions. Maestro Alaric Thorne wasn't merely afraid. He was retreating into the shadows, a master strategist refusing to engage on an opponent's terms. His withdrawal wasn't an admission of defeat, but a tactical maneuver designed to destabilize her, to leave her floundering without a formal opponent. But Ilara was no longer alone. Evelyn Reed's scathing article had created a public outcry, transforming a private audition into a city-wide debate. The Palace Theater, raw and unfinished, now stood as a symbolic arena. Thorne's retreat, instead of extinguishing her fire, only fueled it, crystallizing her purpose. This wasn't just about her. It was about the very soul of music, about access, about justice. "He can withdraw his challenge, Lena," Ilara declared to Lena Rodriguez over the phone, her voice ringing with newfound resolve. "But I haven't withdrawn mine. We're still doing this. The concert, the message, it all stands." Lena, a whirlwind of energy, was already rallying her volunteers. "Absolutely." The article lit a fire under everyone. People are calling, offering help, even small donations. This is bigger than Thorne now. This is a movement. Over the next few days, the Palace Theater became a hive of activity. Volunteers from all walks of life, inspired by Ilara's story and Evelyn's compelling journalism, converged on the venerable old theater. Carpenters, electricians, artists, and students worked tirelessly, cleaning, setting up makeshift lighting, and building temporary seating. The raw brick walls and exposed structural elements of the renovation became part of the aesthetic, a deliberate statement against the polished opulence of traditional concert halls. It was a space being reborn, mirroring Ilara's own journey. Evelyn Reed, true to her word, became Ilara's unofficial publicist, arranging interviews with local news channels and online music blogs. Ilara, initially uncomfortable in the spotlight, found her voice, speaking passionately about the democratizing power of music, about art transcending privilege, and about the vital importance of diverse voices in classical music. Each interview further solidified public support, transforming her into a symbol of defiance against the establishment. Meanwhile, Maestro Thorne remained conspicuously silent. His absence from the public discourse was a calculated move, designed to starve Ilara's momentum, to make her public challenge seem like a performance without an audience, a rebellion without a target. His allies within the Philharmonic's board quietly began to spread rumors, questioning Ilara's professional stability, subtly undermining her credibility. Whispers of radicalism and disrespect for tradition began to circulate through the city's elite circles. One evening, a week before the planned concert at the Palace, Ilara received an unexpected phone call. It was Julian Vance, a respected, albeit slightly controversial, music agent, known for his unconventional roster of artists and his penchant for championing underdogs. "Miss Vance," Julian began, his voice smooth and reassuring. "My name is Julian Vance. I've been following your story with keen interest. Evelyn Reed is a mutual acquaintance, and she speaks very highly of your talent and your tenacity." "Mr. Vance," Ilara replied, a cautious hope bubbling within her. "Thank you for calling." "Let's be frank," Julian continued. "Thorne is a formidable opponent. His silence is more dangerous than his fury. He's not going to attack you directly. He's going to make you irrelevant. He's going to try and choke off your oxygen supply." "What do you mean?" Ilara asked, a cold dread creeping into her heart. "He's already started. Orchestras with ties to the Philharmonic, major festivals, even smaller venues are quietly being advised against booking you. Promoters are suddenly too busy. Major critics, beyond Evelyn, are being discouraged from attending your concert. He's using his immense influence to create a professional blackout." Ilara felt a wave of despair. This was Thorne's shadow play, a far more insidious attack than a direct confrontation. He wasn't trying to win an argument. He was trying to erase her, to make her disappear from the classical music landscape before she could even truly emerge. "But the public support, the Palace concert," Ilara stammered. "That's precisely why he's doing this," Julian explained. "He can't beat you in a public popularity contest, but he can ensure that after your one night of glory, there's nothing for you beyond it. No career, no future. He wants to make you a fascinating, but ultimately fleeting, anomaly." Julian paused, then continued, his voice softer, more personal. "Evelyn also told me about your financial struggles, your background. She said your piano, the one you learned on, was donated, and she mentioned your work with community music programs. Is that true?" "Yes," Ilara confirmed, confused by the shift in topic. "I teach piano to underprivileged kids in the Bronx. Music saved my life, Mr. Vance. I believe it can save theirs, too." "Exactly," Julian said, a new energy in his voice. "And that, Miss Vance, is where Thorne is vulnerable. He can starve you of professional opportunities, but he can't starve you of your truth. What if we turn this blackout into a spotlight? What if we embrace the very thing he's trying to suppress? Your connection to the people, to the community, to the authentic, raw power of music that isn't beholden to elite patrons." Ilara felt a spark of understanding. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we don't just have a concert at the Palace," Julian revealed, his voice brimming with excitement. "I'm suggesting we turn it into a statement, a fundraiser for those very community music programs you champion. We embrace the populist sideshow he sneers at. We make it a celebration of music for everyone, showcasing not just your talent, but the raw talent of the children you teach. Imagine it, Ilara. You, performing with a small ensemble of your students as part of your solo act. A direct, undeniable testament to the power of music to change lives, something Thorne, in his gilded cage, has long forgotten. Ilara's mind reeled, performing with her students, sharing the stage with them. It was a terrifying, exhilarating idea. It would be unprofessional by classical standards, certainly, but it would be profoundly true to her own heart, to her deepest convictions. It would be an act of defiance, not just against Thorne, but against the very notion that classical music had to remain pristine, untouched by the realities of everyday life. "It's risky," she finally said, her voice a whisper. "The critics, Thorne." "The critics who matter, like Evelyn, will understand," Julian countered. "And Thorne? He'll be apoplectic. But what can he do? He's already shown his hand. He's trying to make you disappear. We're going to make you unforgettable. We're going to make this concert at the Palace Theater not just a performance, but a movement." A movement. The word resonated deep within Ilara. It wasn't just about proving Thorne wrong anymore. It was about proving something much larger, much more profound. It was about creating a ripple effect, a wave that could shake the very foundations of the classical music establishment. But the idea of her students, so vulnerable, so innocent, being exposed to the harsh glare of this public battle, it filled her with a protective fear. Could she truly expose them to Thorne's insidious wrath? And could she, an unknown, possibly pull off such an ambitious, emotionally charged performance, with only a few days left before the curtain rose on the palace stage? The pressure was immense, the stakes higher than ever. The protective fear for her students warred fiercely with Ilara Vance's unyielding conviction. To expose those innocent, bright-eyed children to the unforgiving glare of the public, to the potential scorn of Maestro Thorne and his formidable network, felt like an immense burden. Yet, Julian Vance's words echoed in her mind. "We're going to make you unforgettable. We're going to make this concert at the Palace Theater not just a performance, but a movement." And it was this promise of a movement, of a ripple effect far beyond her own career, that finally tipped the scales. She would not just play for herself. She would play for them, for every unheard voice, for every dream nurtured in the shadows. "Yes, Julian," Ilara declared, her voice firm, resolute. "We do it. The fundraiser. And the students. They will play." The remaining days leading up to the concert were a whirlwind of focused energy and collaborative spirit. The Palace Theater, once a dusty monument to forgotten glamour, began to hum with life. Lena Rodriguez and her army of volunteers, a tapestry of diverse New Yorkers, worked tirelessly, transforming the raw, scaffold-lined space into an intimate, defiant performance arena. Exposed brick became a dramatic backdrop. Industrial lighting fixtures cast theatrical glows, and rows of refurbished wooden chairs replaced the plush velvet of grander halls. It was imperfect, authentic, and utterly breathtaking. Ilara poured herself into rehearsals, not only refining her own challenging repertoire, but also carefully selecting and arranging pieces that would allow her young students to shine. Matteo, with his surprisingly strong hands and a shy, fervent passion for Bach. Little Sophia, whose delicate fingers brought a tender, almost heartbreaking beauty to a simple folk melody. And the others, each bringing their unique spirit to the makeshift stage. Ilara worked with them in their community center, transforming their apprehension into excitement, their nervous energy into a shared purpose. She saw in their eyes not just the hope of performance, but the profound joy of being truly seen, truly heard. Meanwhile, Thorne's shadow play intensified. Julian Vance reported that while Evelyn Reed's ongoing articles kept Ilara's story alive in the public consciousness, key classical music critics had indeed been conspicuously quiet. Gala attendees, usually eager to embrace new talent, were being subtly steered away from the palace spectacle. Whispers of a crass populist stunt and disrespect for the sacred art permeated the elite circles. Thorne wasn't trying to crush her openly. He was trying to choke the oxygen from her, to ensure that her moment of triumph, if it came, would be isolated, an anomaly that would quickly fade into obscurity. The day of the concert dawned, crisp and bright, mirroring the nervous energy pulsating through Ilara. Backstage at the palace, the atmosphere was electric. Lena, radiant and exhausted, moved among the bustling crew, ensuring every detail was in place. Evelyn Reed, elegant and watchful, surveyed the burgeoning crowd, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. Julian Vance, ever the pragmatist, offered words of calm reassurance, while simultaneously fielding calls and making last-minute arrangements. Ilara, dressed simply in a deep emerald dress that shimmered under the stage lights, felt a mixture of profound fear and exhilarating determination. Her students, dressed in their finest, their faces alight with a mixture of awe and nervous excitement, huddled around her. She knelt, giving each a hug, a whispered word of encouragement. "Remember," she told them, her voice soft but clear, "we play from the heart. We play our truth. That's all that matters." As the house lights dimmed, a hush fell over the packed Palace Theater. The roar of the city outside faded, replaced by the collective anticipation of hundreds. Julian Vance stepped onto the stage, his voice resonating with a quiet power. He introduced Ilara, not just as a pianist, but as an artist whose journey embodied the very spirit of community, resilience, and the democratizing power of music. He spoke of the fundraiser for the local music programs, tying their collective effort directly to the hope for a more inclusive future. Then, Ilara walked onto the stage. A wave of spontaneous applause erupted, warm and genuine, a stark contrast to the polite, measured claps of her audition. She bowed, a genuine smile gracing her lips, and settled onto the piano bench. The air, though raw, was charged with a palpable sense of shared purpose. This wasn't just a concert. It was a gathering, a declaration. Her fingers found the keys, and she began. Not with a flourish, but with a piece of her own composition. A haunting, lyrical melody that wove together threads of struggle and hope. A poignant narrative set to music. It was raw, deeply personal, and utterly captivating. Her playing was not just technically brilliant. It was infused with the very essence of her journey. Each note a whispered confession, a defiant roar, a heartfelt prayer. She moved through a varied program, from challenging classical pieces to contemporary works, each imbued with her unique, emotionally charged interpretation. The audience was mesmerized, hanging on every note, feeling the music deep within their souls. There were no polite coughs, no restless shifts, just a collective, breathless immersion. Then came the moment for the students. Ilara introduced them, her voice swelling with pride. Shyly, Matteo, Sophia, and two others took their places at a smaller keyboard set up beside the grand piano, and for a beautiful, poignant 10 minutes, they performed. Matteo's earnest Bach, Sophia's tender folk song, and a simple, collaborative ensemble piece that, despite its minor imperfections, radiated pure, unadulterated joy. The audience didn't just applaud. They roared, a standing ovation that shook the very foundations of the old theater. They saw not just future musicians, but the living, breathing embodiment of Ilara's message. That music belonged to everyone. That talent bloomed in the most unexpected places. Ilara joined them for the final, thunderous piece, a rousing, uplifting melody that fused classical structure with a vibrant, almost gospel-like energy. Her piano soared, intertwining with the smaller keyboard and the simple, heartfelt singing of her students. It was a symphony of hope, a triumphant crescendo that filled the theater and spilled out into the New York night. As the final note faded, the applause was deafening, a wave of pure, unadulterated emotion washing over the stage. Ilara stood, tears streaming down her face, her students beaming beside her. This wasn't just a triumph of music. It was a triumph of spirit, a victory for the human heart. But as the cheers echoed, Ilara's eyes scanned the crowd, instinctively searching. She saw Evelyn Reed, tears in her eyes, giving a slow, meaningful nod. She saw Julian Vance, a satisfied, triumphant smile on his face. And then, at the very back of the theater, standing in the shadows, almost obscured by a towering pillar, she saw him. Maestro Alaric Thorne. He stood motionless, a solitary, imposing figure, his face unreadable in the dim light. He had come. He had witnessed her triumph, witnessed the raw, undeniable power of her music and the pure, infectious joy of her students. Ilara held his gaze across the sea of cheering faces, a silent, profound understanding passing between them. She had not only accepted his challenge, she had redefined it, making him a reluctant witness to a revolution he had tried so desperately to prevent. What would he do now? What could he possibly say? The stage was no longer his. It belonged to the people, to the truth, to the music. And the maestro, in that moment, seemed utterly lost, caught between the echoes of his past and the undeniable, vibrant roar of a new, inclusive future. And so Ilara Vance, the unassuming pianist with an unbreakable spirit, proved that true artistry isn't confined to gilded halls or exclusive circles. She reminded us that the most profound melodies often emerge from struggle, from defiance, and from an unwavering belief in the power of music to unite, to heal, and to inspire. Her journey was a testament to the idea that authenticity will always triumph over arrogance, and that a single, brave voice can ignite a movement, challenging the foundations of privilege and ushering in a new era of inclusivity. Ilara taught us that standing up for what is right, even against insurmountable odds, can create ripples of change far beyond our wildest dreams. She showed us that the greatest symphony is not just heard, but felt, deep within the heart, connecting us all through the universal language of human experience. Let Ilara's story be a reminder that your voice matters, your truth has power, and that the stage for real change is always open to those brave enough to step onto it. If Ilara's journey resonated with you, if you felt the power of her music and the strength of her spirit, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more meaningful stories that touch the soul and inspire the heart. Thank you for listening.